Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
So, standard, Ravnica Allegiance, first big event in the books.
Yep.
Didn't go quite how I predicted initially. Did not go.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. There's definitely some pretty big things here that, like, which waves come out the gate the biggest, not always that predictable, but the stuff here makes a lot of sense. I mean, so to begin with, the deck of the tournament was definitely the talk. So throughout the tournament, people were just all about the Sultai mid-range deck, and Hydroid Krasis is a card more so than the Sultai mid-range deck. Hydroid Krasis appearing across the board in basically every blue-green deck, every Bant deck, every Sultai deck. So much so, in fact, that I believe at one point on Mitgo, by the end of the weekend, Hydroid Krasis was selling for more than every other Mythic in the set put together. Like, it was definitely a very, very intensely sought-out card this weekend. And the part of the thing that made Hydroid Krasis so good here, in particular in the Sultai deck, which ended up winning the event entirely, as well as being the biggest deck in the hands of Anthony Davardi. The Sultai deck is like the continuation of the Golgari deck from the previous season, and it just splashes. Hydroid Krasis is like the only blue card. Some people play Hostage Taker, and then people play a little bit of Permission in the sideboard. But it's basically a Hydroid Krasis in a black-green deck. And then if you play Hydroid Krasis on 4, you're getting another Jadelight Ranger type of card. You know what I mean? Like a 2/2 flyer, draw a card. So it's not the greatest deal in the world, but you're making some progress. But one of the things that makes it so crazy is that then when you find Finality later, you can just, instead of find Finality back a Jadelight Ranger, you can find Finality back a Hydroid Krasis, and then next thing you know, now you have like a 6/6 flyer and you draw 3 cards or something.
Yeah, you got big resources at like a little bit later in the game.
It's also a Brain Geyser that Vivian Reed can find.
Oh, well. If Vivian Reed weren't enough of a Brain Geyser on her lonesome. And
then I think the amount that Hydroid Krasis has been drawing, like, it really does provide a powerful tool against Esper, just because they've got access to some pretty good permission, which just absorbs all over the place and syncopate if they want it or whatever. And so having access to Hydroid Krasis with the cast trigger instead of an enters the battlefield trigger, quite potent.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things about this card as we see the standard format evolve over time. So Hydroid Krasis has a cast trigger instead of a comes into play trigger like, an Explore guy or a Ravenous Chupacabra. And while functionally, doesn't make that much difference, if you're playing against permission type cards, then it matters a lot, right? Because even if they counter the Hydroid Krasis, so you're not going to get the big body, it will, still draw you cards or potentially gain you life.
One other note is that I would expect Memorial to Folly, which we see 2 copies of in Anthony's deck, to be on the rise because of Hydroid Krasis. It's just another way to take your early 2-for-1 that you just put down to get a little bit of value, to convert it later into a game-winning Brain Geyser.
Yeah, so this is like, it's kind of like a weird progressive grind now, right? Like before, the Golgari deck was just like incremental advantage, incremental advantage, incremental advantage. But now it's kind of like incremental advantage, incremental advantage, incremental advantage, trade, big spell. Using those incremental advantages to get to a different place instead of just another Merfolk Branchwalker on turn 20, right?
Yeah. You eventually build a crescendo besides just Carnage Tyrant.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I actually didn't have kind of, if I were to say I thought there was going to be a blue-green deck at the top of the first big standard tournament, I wouldn't have picked Golgari Splash Jellyfish. That's not the direction I would have gone.
Well, I mean, I think coming in, just the amount that this is sort of picking up the legacy of Golgari, it definitely was on the high end, but I think part of it is with the amount that people were expecting red. So red was actually the second most popular strategy, but it got butchered on day 2 with just how much everybody's decks were just teched out to beat red.
Yeah, it looked awful, right? The highest performing red deck was a very storied SCG player, Caleb Scherer, in 10th, so out of the top 8, playing an aggro deck, 20 lands, 20 mountains. So I kind of, like, Caleb's deck kind of deviates from the Hive Mind deck, I think, that's largely been going around. The various potential ways you can play online and Twitter and so forth. He doesn't have any Steamkins, which I found to be very, very surprising. And instead, he replaces those with 3 main deck Risk Factors and 1 main deck Lava Coil.
Yeah, I think it's kind of... I mean, the addition of Light Up the Stage and Skewer the Critics is no surprise, right?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I think, like, the kind of deck that I've been loving to play for months, which is Get Up to Experimental Frenzy and Rekindling Phoenix, is largely going to be shifted into a 20-land or even 18 to 19-land deck with eight spectacles in it, right? Because Skewer the Critics, gives you an offensive redundancy that, like, really plays off of getting attacks in, right? And then Light Up the Stage... It's not as powerful as Experimental Frenzy, but it's so fast, right? You just, boom, you get an advantage, and your cards are so cheap, you can just keep going with it. So I think that kind of replaces that whole engine. I
mean, so part of it is that Experimental Frenzy has several problems of why it's just fallen out of favor so much. First and foremost is the last thing you want to do is make your opponents mortify good. Part of the value of Experimental Frenzy before was that the control decks couldn't naturally just answer it so easily. And if you're taking their bad removal spell and making it good, that's just real problematic.
Yeah, that's substantial.
Second of all, Experimental Frenzy is it's just slower. Now that you have access to 4 Light Up the Stage and 4 Skewer the Critics, you can be so low to the ground. I'm not even sure you want to play Lava Coil. I mean, Caleb's only got 1 here, but I'm not even sure you want Lava Coil main deck because of just how bad it is with Skewer the Critics.
Well, I think you want Lava Coil in the 75, right?
I do too, definitely, for sure. I just don't know. I mean, 1's not too bad, but I just think it might be with the sheer quantity of Esper out there and other weirdo decks like various Nexus of Fate decks and so on, and the Guildgate decks. I mean, because it sounds funny, but Lava Coil is actually not necessarily the greatest against the Guildgate decks either, even though they have so many creatures, just because of how big their creatures get.
Oh, yeah, like their creatures could be like 8/8 or something. So, I think that there's some other dimensions that make the cards that were traditionally pretty good in the red deck prior to the new set coming in kind of bad now. It's not Modern, right? So in Modern, like the red decks have such a low casting cost, like everything's some kind of version of 1. But if you Light Up the Stage in an early turn and turn over an Experimental Frenzy, you're just stranding the Frenzy and wasting the Light Up the Stage, right? Like, the strength of Light Up the Stage is like a very Necropotence kind of strength, which is it combines real well with low casting cost stuff to kind of just lay it all out. Everything's coming out because it's so cheap, and we're just going to get our next reload, Yep. If you're going to play cards that cost like 3 and 4 mana, it becomes much, much less efficient than if you're just dumping Firebrands and stuff out. But I'm still puzzled why he doesn't have Steamkin. I thought Steamkin was one of the best cards in the offensive red deck.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I do know that every card in his deck is, either costs basically. I mean, Fanatical Firebrand and Gitu Lava Runner effectively have haste most of the time, and Chain Whirler and Pyromancer have entered the battlefield triggers that do damage to the face. So, like, if you're living in a world where you just want every single one of your cards to just go upstairs and not make removal good, that the Steamkin is definitely something that makes the removal good. But that's partly because of how good the Steamkin is as a card. I think Risk Factor is actually really smart right now. I think you want to have a lot of face damage, definitely, because you just want to be sidestepping interaction. But I think I would be off of the main deck Lava Coil, at least for next week.
What do you think about the Flame of Keld as a spell rather than Risk Factor? I think what I've been thinking of kind of is like the Hive Mind red deck, which is like you just look at what people are playing on Arena and Best of One. It's like 20 mountains, these 16 creatures, 4 Steamkin, and then all the 4-ofs in the spell slots that he's got. And then sometimes you'll see someone go down to 18 to 19 mountains and play like 1 to 2 the Flame of Keld. What do you think about that versus Risk Factor?
I don't know. I like Risk Factor. I think I would be on Risk Factor personally, but I could see it the other way. I mean, there's some things to like there, but I think that Flames of Keld, I want to be just super proactive. I don't want to flip Flames of Keld to my light up the stage.
Yeah, there's some fuzzy interactions with Light Up the Stage in Standard. Obviously nobody's going to advocate cutting Chain Whirler yet, right? Maybe at some point. But those guys aren't particularly great friends. Caleb's got a lot of unusual cards in the sideboard. Some of them are pretty cool, but they are unusual. Like Direct Current, for example.
That's okay. It's okay. It's a little slow, though. But
it's like a little not powerful for 3 mana.
It is a little not powerful.
It's like 2 cards and twice the mana for like most of a char. Right? I don't know. It doesn't seem unplayable. I always thought it might be playable, but it's a little not powerful. That's the thing. I love Act of Treason, though. If you think somebody's going to have some Gigundus Hydroid Krasis or something, just grab that thing. Send it into the red zone. I love that.
I mean, maybe you want to, maybe there are spots where you want to board in Risk Factor, 2 Direct Currents, Experimental Frenzy, and just cut the Chain Whirlers, and you just need to have something that does damage. But in that spot, it seems like it's a horrible Banefire.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that in the kind of spots that you're imagining, and given the kinds of tools that are up for selection here, I think I'd at least be considering some cards like Treasure Map. And then separately, I'm real confused. There's not a collision in this sideboard, right? This deck does not have a direct answer to a Lara Dawnbringer, does it? At all.
Act of Treason.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess in retrospect,
I hope I win this turn, right?
Fight with fire. Although maybe it's a calculated gamble.
There's no fight with fire, no collision.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying he's quote wrong end quote. This is a pretty decorated deck designer, but I do have some question marks.
So in terms of other red aggro decks, because there was a variety, but none of them really did all that well. The best performing, even remotely red, and it wasn't really red, it's Izzet Drakes, Brad Carpenter's top 8 list. Nothing really new in the whole deck with the one exception of a playset of Terramanders.
Yeah, that is a pretty cool card, right? So Terramander, it's kind of like Delver of the Secrets 2K19, right? So it's a 1/1 Salamander Drake. So it's on theme. It's a Drake. It's a 1/1 Salamander Drake for you. And then it's got this adaptability that can make it a 5/5 flyer. And it can potentially be real cheap in this deck, right? Because that 7U, the 7 is really it's like all the synergies that make the Enigma Drake and the Crackling Drake offensively powerful at all could easily just be turning the Terramander super cheap.
Yeah, and Terramander actually works so well with Charter Course. Like being able to open up on turn 1 Terramander, turn 2 Charter Course is actually like a great way to start getting some extra material to work with.
Oh, that's really cool. That's like a very, very, very cost-effective catalyst there, right? So oftentimes you're not going to do anything productive on the first turn.
Right. Unless you're, because it's not like, even just opting isn't the greatest thing to do in turn 1. Notably, Brad does have one extra shock lane in the form of a Blood Crypt. He's got the one stray Blood Crypt for occasionally Discovery dispersaling on the backside.
Yeah, well, it's actually good on both sides, right? So Blood Crypt or Dragon Skull Summit actually gives you an additional way to cast Discovery without, in the cases that you don't have a blue mana, you can cast it on the black side of the Blood Crypt or Dragon Skull Summit, and then you can dispersal sometimes. And I mean, I've tested the Dragon Skull Summit list that I think Carlos Romao was playing, a few months ago, and it comes up sometimes. And when you need it, it's it's not the worst.
So walk me through how you're supporting Star of Extinction in this deck.
Well,
isn't that expensive?
Yeah, I mean, this deck only has 21 lands, right? But it does have 4 opt and 4 chart a course, so it can potentially draw up. Also, in the games that you have Star of Extinction, you might very well have Niv Mizzet Perun, right? So that helps you draw extra cards also, or Treasure Map. Treasure Map is just a direct way to cast Star of Extinction.
All right, it sure seems a little expensive to me, but I guess you could have one.
There's only one. Here's the thing. This deck does not have very good answers to certain threats, right? Like, if the opponent sticks a Carnage Tyrant, which is not unusual because Carnage Tyrant can't be countered, right? And not that there's so many counter spells anyway that can counter creatures in this deck. You can't Beacon Bolt it once it's already in play. It's too big for most of your burn cards, even if it weren't hexproof. How do you plan to get rid of that card, right? Like, you can't just scoop. Like, Golgari decks, or what ended up being the Sultai deck that won the tournament, have been playing that card quite a bit for the whole format. So I think you have to have something. Also, it does have like some additional applications. Like, if you can get rid of a Memorial at the same time as getting rid of a Carnage Tyrant, it's pretty good. You just think like it's just tough to cast it all?
Yeah, just getting up to 7. Yeah, I just think it costs a lot, so it sits in your hand. But one of my worries is that maybe it's not too slow, but like, I know historically against Golgari, you've had a lot of extra time because they're just dinking around and not finishing you off sometimes. But I kind of think Hydroid Krasis might change the rules of engagement there a little bit, because like, you Star of Extinction against Golgari now and you don't even win. They just Hydroid Krasis and you haven't gotten anywhere. You're like further behind.
Aha, my friend. That is when the Entrancing Melody comes into play. So let me tell you about the mana efficiency of Entrancing Melody against the Hydroid Krasis. You can't get them on the front end, right? Like, they're going to get... The Hydroid Krasis gets its money, right? The Mole Drifter half of the Hydroid Krasis got its money. But you, for the bargain price of much less than, 14 mana, or whatever it would have cost you, can get the Baneslayer side of the Hydroid Krasis just fine with Entrancing Melody. What do you think about that?
I mean, that's not the best thing ever. You're talking about for 4 mana?
Yeah, but they just tapped like a bazillion mana. And
not necessarily. What if they tapped like 8 mana? Right? Like, if they tapped 8 mana, they spent a card and you spent a card, they drew 3 extra cards and gained 3 life, but you got a 6/6 flyer?
That's a heck of a lot better than them having a 6/6 flyer still.
But they have 3 cards. I mean, it's okay.
I can't argue with you. They have 3 cards, yeah. But I mean, like, it's relatively...
What if they just drop Vivian Reed and shoot it out of the sky?
Oh, man. Always with the guy who just drew 3 cards having the advantage. Always. I don't know. I think Izzet Drakes is, in my experience, it is an extraordinarily tough deck to play perfectly.
Yeah, it was a tough weekend for the deck, too. I think that it might need to evolve. I think Terramander's like a step in the right direction, but I think it's going to have to do some more evolving to keep up with this new breed of decks. Some of the new decks are just so powerful. Go ahead, please.
This deck was a deck that, like, evolved in its ability because it had good and efficient flyers, was not reliant on cards that could just be, the previous iterations were all full of Arclight Phoenixes, right? So this deck has a lot less air. You know, a lot of the cards that were catalyzing Arclight Phoenix were, you just didn't want to draw them if you didn't have Arclight Phoenix going. And, you know, this one's more about just like 2 or 3 really good punches to get in and win with a little bit of Spell Pierce and Dive Down to just keep the stuff alive. Wasn't this like a reaction to the response cards in Golgari originally? I mean, is that a wrong interpretation of where this deck is coming from?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the deck, I mean, maybe it gained some popularity because of that. But, like, I think it's just for its own merits. It's just Crackling Drake demands, you know, a deck. And then once people started experimenting and iterating on it, they went from there. It's the second place deck that I think is really, man, there's something there to be gleaned. This is a pretty exciting list already, and I think that there's some pretty sizable possibilities here. There's a lot of possibility space with Jonathan Hobbs' Bant mid-range deck. Well, a bunch of people were playing Bant, like with not a bunch. There were some people playing Bant Nexus decks and so on. I really like this much more tempo control. Like, it's got a little bit of like a fairies / Cobblade thing going almost, with 4 Angel of Grace, 4 Frilled Mystic, 4 Growth Chamber Guardian, and a Chalet with a couple of Teferis, and then a bunch of card draw and a little bit of interaction in the form of stuff like Seal Away and Settle the Wreckage, and History of Benalia for more threats. So it's got some real card advantage-y threats with History of Benalia, Frilled Mystic, Growth Chamber Guardian, all reliable 2-for-1s. Angel of Grace, frequently a 2-for-1.
Oh, you mean like somebody's just attacking with their Goblin Chain Whirler or something, and you just like slam it in combat and get a good block in?
Right. Yeah. And, or they just tap out for a Planeswalker, and then you just drop Angel of Grace and X their Planeswalker on the way in.
Oh, I love that too.
And the one of the things I love about it is the use of Growth Chamber Guardian and Frilled Mystic, and Angel of Grace too for that matter, but all 3 of those new threats are just quite good, and they play a really good flash game, because if you leave your mana open, you can like threaten Frilled Mystic, and if they don't play into your Frilled Mystic, you can drop Angel of Grace to keep the pressure on, and even if you don't really have anything, you can just activate your Growth Chamber Guardian and go get another Growth Chamber Guardian. You know, and I think Growth Chamber Guardian is just such a powerful mid-game.
Yeah, this deck is really kind of the realization of one of those ideas that you were spinning last week with Growth Chamber Guardian. Like, it's got Frilled Mystic and Growth Chamber Guardian, and then there's kind of Angel of Grace for just a little bit more flash. It's weird how that card is so... I hate to say synergistic because they do such different things with Frilled Mystic, but like the theme is very, very consistent between these cards.
Definitely. The thing I can't believe you're not wanting to play Wilderness Reclamation in this deck. With 4 Angel of Grace, 4 Frilled Mystic, activating Growth Chamber Guardian, holding up Settle the Wreckage, Chemist's Insight, all these instants, everything from Blink of an Eye and Seal Away to, and I'm not saying you even necessarily want them, but like Depose, another great card with Wilderness Reclamation. Every card in this deck is so good with Wilderness Reclamation. Like
March of the Multitudes.
You could do that too.
Put that on the stack. Let's get another tappy tap. Like 101 lifelinkers.
So my first thought is, boom, start off with this deck, but with Wilderness Reclamation.
Who are you cutting? History of Benalia?
I don't know. There's a few things to figure out there. History of Benalia is definitely the least on theme, but it is a powerful card, and I think we want to be fast.
Yeah, it's a very powerful card, but like when I say this, I mean no disrespect to the wonderful card History of Benalia. I just think that like nobody loses to History of Benalia. They lose to History of Benalia and History of Benalia's team. You know, like History of Benalia is a great team player, but nobody just loses to just History of Benalia. So I think like if you're going to take something, or this, it's like not a Knight deck, it's not a White Weenie deck, it's not a Capuchin deck. Right, so History of Benalia isn't at its full strength here. It's just a very good card.
Yep.
So I'm saying, like, well, this is the least synergistic card, and you know, if we want to make room for a card that actually enhances a lot of the synergies that are implied by a lot of these other cards, might be the one to cut.
That seems reasonable. Yeah, that's one to try. What do you think of Depose and Warrant Warden, by the way?
All right, so I liked both of these cards when I was just like kind of looking at cards to evaluate the set, but I was a little skeptical that they would see a lot of play. Warrant, obviously the Azorius cheap instant half of Warrant Warden is it's very efficient on mana, depending on what you're playing against, and sometimes you get like a really, really good trade with it. But Warden is real. It's like it's just Sarah Angel, right, or Sarah Sphinx,
and it's at the cost of Angel of Grace into Fairy Hero of Dominaria mana. So I'm not into it. I know a lot of people play it and like it, but I think it's not necessarily out of the question. But man, am I don't know. It's okay. It's okay. I'm not excited about it.
Like, if you were really in it for the Warden, I don't think that your fifth Angel of Grace would be a Sarah Angel before it was a Lyra Dawnbringer, right? Like, I think that if that...
Well, you're in it instead of the Seal Away so that you don't just have an extra Seal Away against Esper. You have a dinky Sarah Angel guy, an air elemental.
Well, I mean, Warrant is not as good as Seal Away, probably most of the time.
I guess Sarah Angel.
In terms of defending yourself. But I guess you have like a not that bad Seal Away and then a not that horrible Angel of Grace, and then together they make the beautiful marriage of a playable card. Is that kind of...
Maybe. I guess that's the theory.
Now, Depose I like a lot more because it has the magic word on it, which is draw card. And this card is actually pretty... I don't know. It's like very, very, very synergistic, I think, in a deck like this, which has cards like March of the Multitudes and Settle the Wreckage. You could just kind of annoy somebody who has a pretty good threat with Depose and then force them to play additional threats to get through your guys and then get them with a big Settle or a March.
Well, I think that Depose is going to be deceptively good with Seal Away. Like, the ability when your opponent plays a threat that you can just go Depose, tap it, Seal Away it, so that it can't even block. Like, that's kind of like just a nice sequence, right? Like that opens up some options for people who are counting on blocking and not just walking into Seal Away. Second of all, I think that the backside deploy is actually having a little bit of extra life gain is going to be really important with just how much the red decks are just full of bolts. Even though they have a great weekend, I think having just a little bit of life gain there can really make a difference.
Oh, I completely agree. If they don't have... Also, the casting cost on Deploy is actually deceptively very valuable against the red deck because Deploy is an instant, but it costs 4. So it actually comes after the first Goblin Chain Whirler a lot of the time. If you were deploying those before the first Goblin Chain Whirler, you might actually be less likely to get the life gain, right? So they go Chain Whirler, you get nugged, they're tapped out, and then you have maybe a turn or two later, you have an instant that can make some 1/1 flyers, and you're actually getting a little value out of this.
It's also going to be extra good when Wilderness Reclamation comes down.
Yeah, I mean, this deck is 80% of the way there, right?
Promising.
Super promising card in this deck. Mass Manipulation. I kind of love this card.
Yeah, me too. Yep, me too. It's a little slow. Takes a lot of blue mana, but in small numbers, I think it's a really exciting top end.
It's not really that bad, right? Like, if X equals 1, right, it's just 6. That's just the cost of a card that you would play.
Well, no, you wouldn't, because you don't play in Bolas's Clutches. I mean, Bolas's Clutches can be destroyed by Mortify or something, and it has like a non-zero amount of drawback in the form of the Legend rule. But for the most part, in Bolas's Clutches is basically Mass Manipulation, but slightly for one with slightly easier to cast. It's the 2 where you really get the profit.
I can buy that. I'm just saying I've played Confiscate more than once, and I didn't hate it.
Yeah. Yep. But I mean, I don't hate in Bolas's clutches either. It just depends on when the format's right for it. What do you think of the other blue-white aggro deck? Instead of Bant, this one was just white-blue, and it was like the old Boros decks, but instead of splashing red for like Experimental Frenzy or just a little bit of red like that, like you're splashing blue for Deputy of Detention. Main deck is basically the only card with the usual just a little bit of permission in the sideboard.
So you're talking about Max Magnuson's deck that he used to come into third place?
Right.
I actually think it's a little bit of a dodgy choice for this point in the format. Especially the red decks got slaughtered on day 2, but the red decks must have been coming out in force. Like, this deck is not good against Goblin Chain Whirler in game 1. Like, it has a ton of cards like Tithe Taker and Hunted Witness-ish, right? Healer's Hawk that are just, Dauntless Bodyguard. It's actively bad against the red deck, and it's just kind of a lot of its good cards are kind of expensive relative to that. I'm not a huge fan, and I don't think it has very much of the upside of the Boros versions. Like, the Boros versions could put the nail in the coffin much better against control than this one can.
Deputy of Detention is kind of sweet against the Krasis, though, right? Because, even if they kill the Deputy, the Krasis comes back as a 0/0.
That is true. That's true.
But that's just speaking to the quality of Deputy of Detention, not this deck,
And yet, there's a weird tension, because Deputy of Detention and Tocatli Honor Guard are not in the deck at the same time, right? And I think, the Krasis deck is badly impacted by Tocatli Honor Guard, right?
That's a great point.
Do you even get to the Krasis if you're not exploring all the whole way? That's one of this deck's absolute best tools against that deck. So I think this deck is a little in odd directions.
I also still just don't love Tithe Taker that much. I mean, I know everybody's going wild for it, and at least you drop it down and it's decent against some of these flash threats or whatever, but it sure looks like a more expensive Hunted Witness.
I don't know. I just have no time for these decks that if you just look at them and you're like, how do you just beat it if your opponent draws any kind of a reasonable draw that includes a Goblin Chain Roller? You get mugged. It's just not.
Yeah, you could dodge those. You could dodge those people, maybe. So actually, there's a different deck that does a little bit of the Afterlife thing, and that's Wyatt Darby's 5th place Esper midrange deck. This was a very different take on Esper, where the other Esper decks were primarily, there was a lot of Esper control. There were also a few people playing Esper midrange, such as this, that's basically, it's an Orzhov deck splashing just a little bit of blue. And in this case, the most important blue cards are actually Thief of Sanity and then, to a degree, Thought Erasure, Hostage Taker, and Dovin Grand Arbiter for a very important reason, and that's just wanting to get the gold card count up so that Hero of Precinct 1 can be such a baller.
Yeah, this deck... and
Deputy of Detention, as we mentioned earlier, is just great in the format right now.
Yeah, this deck, I think, is kind of a gimmick deck, but, sign me up anyway. This deck is first of all, it's doing a lot of really cool things. Hero of Precincts 1 is absolutely must kill in this deck. If somebody drops that on turn 2, their intention is to follow up with a Deputy of Detention or one of these other multicolored trigger cards, and you could be in a lot of trouble, especially if they get to turn 4 and they're just landing Bellhaunt. I think that this deck probably has a ton of lopsided matchups in the format, just based on having Bellhaunt in the main deck.
Well, and I think the Bellhaunt is quite good, but there's another surprising 4-drop that I think flew a little bit under the radar, and that's Seraph of the Scales, which is the 4/3 flyer. You can pay white to give it Vigilance, you can pay black to give it Death Touch, and it has Afterlife 2. So even if they kill the Seraph of the Scales, you get 2 1/1 flyers. And so this is kind of interesting. It's playing a little bit of a Rekindling Phoenix role in this deck.
Oh, yeah. That is pretty interesting. I mean,
instead of an egg that could hatch into another Rekindling Phoenix, you just straight up get 2 4/1 or 2 1/1 flyers, and that's pretty good.
That's all right. I mean, this deck has Dovin Grand Arbiter and Hero of Precinct 1. So it has like a whole thing of being able to do stuff with 1/1 creatures, right? Like that's a thing that it's doing. All right.
Yeah, definitely. But here's what I wonder. What about the games where you don't draw Hero of Precinct 1? Like, this deck has so its threes are awesome, right? Deputy of Detention, Thief of Sanity, Dovin Grand Arbiter. And its fours, Hostage Taker, Seraph of the Scales, Basilica, Bellhaunt. But, like, if you don't draw Hero of Precinct 1, your second turn options are literally just Thought Erasure and Discovery. That seems so slow.
Yeah. I think probably this is just an artifact of being week 1. I think that there is a very effective germ of an idea here. It's just not defined yet.
Oh, yeah. This is an exciting idea. I just think that's the biggest opportunity is figuring out what the other 2-drop is that you can play in this deck.
The thing that's exciting to me is, like, the card that Wyatt didn't play, which he doesn't have Dive Down anywhere. And, like, isn't this the kind of deck where, like, if you just slow played it and you had a Dive Down, like, you would just be so far ahead? Like, isn't the Hostage Taker Dive Down very similar to the what we were calling the Splinter Twin combo of Hostage Taker and Blossomy Defense last?
I don't know. I just don't believe that the format loses to Hostage Taker the same way.
Yeah, but I think Thief of Sanity into Dive Down,
but you might just be too slow.
Get murdered.
I don't know, man. If you're just playing Thief of Sanity on turn 4, like, what if they just sweep the board with Kaya's Wrath? What if they just absorb your Thief of Sanity?
Well, they're jerks.
That's part of the reason why I like Thought Erasure in this deck and Duress after board. I think picking apart their hand is going to make it really hard for them when you have this many must-kill threats. Every card in this deck is a must-kill threat.
Yeah, a lot of them can just win the game by themselves.
Yep.
I'm a little dodgy on this Seraph of the Scales. I liked your comparison to Rekindling Phoenix, but I don't know. I think if we...
Dude, you get that sweet, sweet Lyra Dawnbringer action. You know, if you got Lyra Dawnbringer coming down, Seraph gets buffed.
Yeah, but, I mean, is that better or worse than just lowering the curve so that we can live to get some of these things going?
So what do you think about Consecrate Consume out of the sideboard?
I really like this card because Consume always hits the Carnage Tyrant. Like, you remember back in the day, if you had, like, Eldest Reborn, sometimes you'd be like, get your Llanowar Elf. Doesn't happen with this one. Always gets the Carnage Tyrant. Then you always get a bunch of value from it.
That's a great point.
So I like that a lot. I think, like, if you're consecrating, like, maybe it's right sometimes, but you probably didn't mean to play this card just to consecrate, right? Like, when you get somebody because they're sacrificing a land to do something with their graveyard or something, that's probably pretty cool. But this is mostly there to get big money from Carnage Tyrant, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right. Makes a lot of sense. Some of the decks that did not top 8 were kind of worth taking a look at, like Mason Clark's 4-color Gates deck. There were a bunch of these Gate decks actually, and they didn't. I don't think people quite cracked the code yet, but they weren't embarrassing. And the key is, even though so the best payoff is still Guild Summit from before, where basically every gate is just going to draw an extra card, and it's a Brain Geyser on the way in. But the thing that pushes this deck into viability is the addition of a whole bunch of other payoffs: Gatebreaker Ram, Gate Colossus, Archway Angel, and very importantly, Gates Ablaze.
Oh yeah, Gates Ablaze is like, I think that's the card that really pushes this synergy over the edge, right? Like, you, in this deck specifically, right, you get a card that is, you know, just a legitimate Wrath that could be costing you only 3. And a lot of the time it's at least kind of Clarion-ish.
Yeah, I think you're gonna very frequently be sweeping the board as much as you want here, and there's even a little bit of room to control it where you can end up so. For instance, Gatebreaker Ram gets +1/+1 for each gate you control, so it always lives through Gates Ablaze.
Yeah, that's really cool, right? It's just always going to push through.
Right, and Gate Colossus doesn't always live, but it's got a base 8/8. So it usually lives.
Would you? I mean, let's say you were going to say take a spin with Mason's 4-color Gates deck. So the first swapsy you do is to play 2 more Gatebreaker Rams and only 1 Gate Colossus, because that would be my first thing that I'd think about doing. That thing is 8.
No, it's not. It's like very quickly 4 or less. You just don't play it on turn 4. You got to cut somewhere, though. I think Gate Colossus, Archway Angel, Hydroid Krasis, Mass Manipulation. This is a really, really slow build. What if you don't draw Gates Ablaze?
Or so here's the thing.
At least Archway Angel just gains 10 on the way in.
You could just go Gate, do nothing, ow, Gate, do nothing, ow. Plaza of Harmony on turn 3. You get a lot back, right there on turn 3 for no additional cost, and then you can cast the Gates Ablaze to kind of sweep up the small guys that they have. Then if you have an untapped land for Circuitous Route the next turn, you're actually probably just ahead.
Maybe. It depends on how fast their deck is.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you've got, I guess your stipulation was you don't have Gates Ablaze, right? So if you don't have Gates Ablaze. Yeah, you're just getting run over by a lot of decks. But you cannot beat this deck with the mid-range red deck. I tried to make some builds of the mid-range red deck from the last format, just adding some of the Rakdos spice from the new set, and man, it is humiliating. Every mid-range deck versus Guild Summit is humiliating. Every card they draw is just, I don't know.
So big over the top.
Every card in your deck, but it certainly feels that way.
So there was an even more extreme red deck down at 23rd. Tommy Tomcevic playing a true burn deck. His only 2 creatures were Gitu Lava Runner and Electrostatic Field. His list included for burn Shock, Lightning Strike, Wizard's Lightning, Risk Factor, Skewer the Critics, but then also including Sovereign's Bite and Sword Point Diplomacy. Plus, of course, light up the stage to draw more lava spikes.
Yeah,
this is a deck after your own heart.
I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of this archetype. There's versions of this in the previous format also, obviously. It gets upgraded substantially by the presence of Blood Crypt in the format. I think Tommy had to push all the way, and he didn't. Why is there only 3 Sword Point Diplomacy? That's one of the cards that you play in this deck. That kind of makes it the deck that you're playing. It's actually not so much less efficient than Wizard's Lightning. I could see playing 2 Wizard's Lightning instead.
I mean, why play the Gitu Lava Runner at all?
Yeah, it doesn't make a. I mean, it's fine. It springs at them out of surprise sometimes.
Why not just play the Pyromancer instead?
I mean, you could play Gutter Snipe. People play Gutter Snipe instead. The thing that I'd say is, in the Phoenix deck when they have Monastery Swift Spear, I think it's kind of like that. It fills multiple roles, and some of the roles are not that impressive. But in a deck that's goal is to just deal a finite amount of damage using largely one-off cards, if you got 3 or 4 damage in with 1 use of mana on turn 1, maybe that's all the deck needed.
Well, for sure. If you really got 3 or 4 damage in, that would be great. I just wonder if you'd be more likely to get more damage in on the average with the Pyromancer. Because 2 for sure versus the speculative how many are you going to get from the Lava Runner? I don't know. I guess I just feel like you might get more from the Pyromancer on the average, but
I'm I'm really excited by some of the sideboard cards that Tom.
Oh yeah, I could not agree more. Where do you want to start?
So you were high on Pestilent Spirit last week, and I wasn't really a believer, but here it is. It's already, at least finding its way into a deck sideboard.
Oh, yeah. I think that it's an important tool against the green decks. The ability to make it so that you can now just kill Steel Leaf Paladins, Steel Leaf Champions, or Galta, or anything else with just any burn spell you want. It's such a great dimension, and the opportunity cost is so low.
Yeah, it's good. It's good in a fight, and it's hard to block. Multiple different ways. I think that's pretty exciting. I love Theater of Horrors, new set card. You can tell which cards I love because I already own a play set of this card. So I have high hopes for this one, and I think that in a deck like this, which first of all, you can turn on the Theater of Horrors with almost every card in the deck, right?
Every card in the deck once I get done with it.
Light Up the Stage does not turn on Theater of Horrors. But
it does a lot of the time.
Sometimes, maybe in a roundabout way, right? But once this is on, it's just such a powerful tool to play. And then this is another card among the split cards that I was like, I really like this card, but I wasn't sure if I was going to see a home. Carnival Carnage. We got Carnival's like a tight little package for Rakdos mana. And Carnage, it's an overcosted Blighting, but a regularly costed Blighting was no fun for anyone. So this is the correct cost for Blighting.
I think this is an excellent spot for Carnival Carnage. I think the ability to just to lay into somebody playing like a mid-range, if somebody's playing Control, and you can just hit them with Carnage, that's just such an excellent play. Yeah,
I love it. It also, just subtly, if you're playing with like Pestilent Spirit and Carnival Carnage, and somebody has like a big Krasis turn, like it might be just efficient for you to kill their Krasis because you have Pestilent Spirit with whatever, and then the Carnage will undo whatever they just did. If they just drew however many cards and gained a little life, you just beat them up for those things. You get a lot of it back with one card and a lot less mana commitment that they probably had to make. Or you're ahead, sure. Right?
Finishing just outside the top 32 was the highest finishing Bant Nexus deck, like a Wilderness Reclamation, take all the turns type of deck. Kane Reinhard with, nothing too revolutionary here. Pretty much just the existing deck with the notable exception of 2 copies of Expansion Explosion powered solely off of Gift of Paradise. Now remember, Gift of Paradise lets the land tap for 2, so all by itself, Gift of Paradise is enough for both red you need for Explosion.
Oh, cool.
And then early on, you can cycle Expansion off of a Growth Spiral or something,
Yeah, and Gift of Paradise is just subtly synergistic with Teferi Hero of Dominaria anyway, right? Even if you don't have Wilderness Reclamation in play. Yeah,
if Teferi untaps a land that has Gift of Paradise on it, you're effectively getting even more mana than you were supposed to,
Yeah. So how could this deck be improved? What's the problem? I mean, maybe Kane didn't do that bad, right? Like we don't know what breakers look like or anything. But how can you imagine this deck being improved right now?
Well, so I think this deck needs to level up against Esper. Part of the problem is that one of the most popular strategies was the Esper control deck that I think for a great example of, we can turn to the top 4 list played by Nick Cowden. So this deck, it's a new style of control deck that features, so you've got extra permission, but not too much. You've got Mortify, which is a really big thing, but then subtly, and this is very important, you've got Precognitive Perception. So Precognitive Perception is 3 blue instant, draw 3 cards. So Jace's Ingenuity, but with the added option that if you cast it during your main phase, you scry 3 and then draw 3 cards, which is actually very powerful. That's pretty close to a Tidings.
So if you're just not if you're like not way behind on the battlefield, you're saying like let's just gamble and go precognitive perception on our own turn, or maybe we can do that with like absorb mana open if the game is long enough.
Yeah, and sometimes you just go turn 4 Kaya's Wrath, turn 5 precognitive perception, because you're already planning what you're going to do on the next turn. You know, like if you're like maybe you have another Kaya's Wrath. But sometimes you just need raw material, and you're letting, you're just planning on catching back up again with Vraska's Contempt and Cast Down and Moment of Craving and anything else. I think Precognitive Perception is excellent. I think this is a stronger card than Chemister's Insight, and the printing of Kaya's Wrath, sweeping the board for you at 4, really frees up room for 5-cost cards. You might as well play 5-cost cards anyway, because between Kaya's Wrath and Vraska's Contempt, you're already going to be playing so many 4s.
So how are we getting there? Like, so this deck doesn't have any opts. It doesn't have any jumpstart draws or anything. So it's got a couple of Search for Escontas. It really just has to draw land off the top to get
with 27,
5, 6, and 7.
Yeah, but with 27 land to start with, that's not that big of a deal. Now, I'm not saying you can't play a little bit of library manipulation here. Go ahead, add a little bit of that if you want. But I mean, 27 land that's a hefty chunk.
27 plus those Search for Escontas, right? So at some point, those are becoming lands also.
Right, and you do have an ability to buy yourself a little bit of time, right? Like, I mean, Syncopate and Cast Down is some pretty fast interaction. And Kaya's Wrath is quite the looming threat on turn 4. I love the sideboard Thief of Sanity here. I think Thief of Sanity is going to have a lot of great homes in this new format.
I want the 4th. I think that card is going to make like its Broadway debut. Like it's by itself like a 2/2 evasion creature that has an ability that's more powerful than the ability that the mono blue tempo deck is just really trying to do, right? The mono blue tempo deck is just like, I'm going to play a guy and I'm going to put a Curiosity on it, which, makes it a 2/2 or something, and then starts drawing extra cards. This has a better ability than that and starts off with the evasion. I just really think that this card has been underappreciated. And the Dimir decks don't even play it a lot of the time.
Yep.
So, I mean, I kind of want the 4th. I think it's solid. And this is a great example of why I was a little critical of Caleb's sideboard. There's 2 Lyra Dawnbringers here. Those guys are coming in against Mono Red. For sure. Popular deck. You got to be able to deal with the 5/5.
Mm. Yep. You do. What do you think of the various climb decks? I don't think there's too much to cover there. I just thought it was notable that they share so many cards in common with the Sultai decks and the Bant decks that did well. But the decks with Hadana's Climb actually did very poorly across the board. And I guess the addition of Wild Growth Walker, Incubation, and not even Wild Growth Walker because a lot of them play it too, but focusing on the Hadana's Climb aspect probably just takes you in the wrong direction. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that it's the first week of the new format. People are trying out new ideas. Maybe some of these ideas are going to be fantastic, and they're just not sanded off yet. Like, I've certainly played against Hadana's Climb and been behind, right? And like not known what to do because my opponent was putting me in a pretty sticky situation. And I've also played against Hadana's Climb and be like, oh, well, that's really, really awkward for you. And I'm just going to get you because my strategy is pretty straightforward. So, they maybe just haven't found the medium yet.
Do you think that there's some, or can you spot any room to improve this Gruul deck that Jimmy Brandolin finished 28th with? So it's like a red-green Jade Light Ranger, Merfolk, Branchwalker, Rekindling Phoenix type of deck, but with plenty of new options. So at 2, he's got both Zerta Goblin, which is the Watch Wolf or 2/2 haste, depending on your choice. And then he's also got Growth Chamber Guardian, which is excellent. We had spoken to earlier. And then at 3, the addition of Gruul Spellbreaker, either a 4/4 trample or a 3/3 haste, but notably, as long as it's your turn, you and Gruul Spellbreaker have hexproof. And then finally, at the top, Skargan Hellkite as a new finisher.
So I'm always a little skeptical about these decks. There's a couple of reasons. One, like they don't know how much mana they want, right? Like 24 is a really medium amount of mana to have in a Magic deck, right? Like that's just probably for 60 card decks, it's the most common number we'll see over the history of Magic. But how much mana does this deck really want? Does that number change dramatically if it doesn't play Skargan Hellkite? Right? That's like I
think Skargan Hellkite looks excellent here because I think you're going to want the extra mana anyway because you want to activate Growth Chamber Guardian.
I actually agree with you, but the thing is that there is a version of this deck, and I mean I'm not talking about like a different build of the deck. I'm talking about like you draw certain cards of the deck while you're playing that wants a lot of mana, and then there's a version of the deck that wants to be low and lean. You know what I mean? Like, and those are like they're at odds in a way that other decks that have similar incentives like Lightning Strike, Shocks, and Creatures are not. And so again, I'm a little bit kind of head scratching on that one.
I do wish you had a little bit more ways to sink extra mana for the times where you've got it laying around. Like it's too bad that you don't have like Banefire or something, where you can like use it for a little bit cheap or use it for a lot more later. Yeah, I wish there was a little bit more kicker, just ways to put that extra mana to use.
So one of the things that I don't like about this deck is that it has a huge blind spot against cards like Tocatli Honor Guard, right? Like this deck is pretty reliant on its Explore engine to get up to the operating mana for Skargan Hellkite and maybe even to be able to cast Rekindling Phoenix. And Tocatli Honor Guard interacts pretty well with some of the other cards anyway, right? So
shutting down all the Riot cards is so dope.
Yeah, so I think that there's a blind spot on that. So I don't know. Whenever I see decks like this, I'm always like, what's the prime directive question that we have on this? Because for a deck that's just like I have quick creatures, which is half the creatures, right, and some shocks, I think that the mono red deck does a pretty good imitation of this without having to play like 16 basic lands in 2 different colors, right? But then on the other end, where you're like, all right, I have the 5-drops and the Rekindling Phoenixes and light removal and stuff, the Boros deck actually does like a pretty good job with that. So, I mean, the question is Growth Chamber Guardian specifically good enough to pull us out of both of those archetypes?
No, because I think Growth Chamber Guardian is quite good, but you could use Growth Chamber Guardian even better in other decks.
Yeah, so I'm not sure.
Growth Chamber Guardian's at its best when you can afford to leave mana open.
Yeah, I think this deck is like 2 different decks. One of the decks I would rather be the mono red deck, and the other deck I'd rather be the Boros deck. Because I also think that the 24 land is really confused in this deck.
Yeah, it's too bad that you can't play Llanowar Elf.
So,
or maybe you can.
Maybe that's an improvement possibility. I mean, I don't know. This deck doesn't really seem like it's scared of Goblin Chain Warlord to me. Right? It's just like I think it's willing to play on even ground with Chain Whirler and then try to win with its more powerful creatures going long. Explore decks that are unchecked tend to be pretty good against mono red in Standard.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, obviously, after sideboarding, this deck is a monster against mono red. So, but I'm still not sure like why you would play it instead of Gruul or Sultai, right? Like because Growth Chamber Guardian can be played in a variety of archetypes, like you said. Like is Spellbreaker better than Midnight Reaper? Like I don't know.
Yeah. I think you might actually have it. I think that this is like a lukewarm blend of red aggro and Boros Angels or some other big deck. It could be Bant midrange, whatever it is. Some kind of. I think that you got to find a new slant, a new angle if this deck is going to have enough reason to. It looks solid, but I think it's probably a bad something else.
Yeah, it has a lot of good cards. That's the thing I'd say. Certainly, it has a lot of good cards. I just don't know if the combination of those cards is compellingly better than the combinations of cards that share a lot of its general features in terms of curve and removal.
Sure. One last deck I kind of wanted to touch on was the Grixis deck, whereas almost everybody was playing Esper as far as the control decks go. Michael Viviano was playing Grixis, and it was like basically like the old Niv Mizzet Crackling Drake style Jeskai decks, but instead of Deafening Clarion and Seal Away, he's got Thought Erasure and the Eldest Reborn, and instead of Teferi, he's got the Eldest Reborn, and then he's got Bedevil and Thought Erasure instead of Seal Away and Deafening Clarion.
Yeah, I think this deck is. I think it's pretty cool. It does.
What do you think of 2 Lava Coil, 2 Lightning Strike, 2 Moment of Craving?
Yeah, I what it's cool because it's playing new cards like Bedevil, for example. But the question is really like, what does it offer instead of like Adrian's version of Jeskai? Right, like this deck has a similar structure, which has like a lot of Niv Mizzets, even if it's not 4. I feel like I'd want some dive down action.
No, dude, I think dive down is for people who don't have access to Thought Erasure.
Yeah,
yeah,
he has Thought Erasure, right? So
yep.
when I'm playing Thought Erasure, I mean, I generally want to play some disinformation action. Is that
no? That's only when you play a lot of Surveil. I think Thought Erasure is just a solid card.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly. It
also lets you know how to set up the Niv Mizzet.
Well, it sets up your own deck, right? That's one of the things that's cool about it. It's helpful with Crackling Drake from that perspective. It puts extra cards in for Search for Escanta.
Here's the problem I have with this deck, or one of the problems. There's a couple problems. The first problem I have with this deck is I think that Bedevil plus Niv Mizzet is just a little bit greedy. And you can see it with the hedge of just, like 3 basic islands is it's not Bedevil's best friend, right? And so and then he doesn't want to play any swamps because he's got Niv Mizzet, but then that means that he's playing Bedevil off of literally just 14 black sources. He's got 4 Drowned Catacomb, 4 Dragon Skull Summit, 4 Watery Grave. 14 is not a great number of black sources for your Bedevil. And maybe it's not the biggest deal. Maybe he's just okay playing Bedevil as a 5-drop sometimes. But I don't know. I think there's some tension that needs to be resolved there a little bit, Additionally, I think that the lack of I think that just using 3 Chemister's Insights without having any precognitive perception really, to me, looks like an inefficiency. And I get that you can only play so many 5s, but I mean, when you only have 2 The Eldest Reborn and 1 Ral, it's not like you're actually that crammed there anyway. I would want to find a way to play the precognitive perception. I think that there's so many good 4s that you could be playing. I also think this deck is a sweeper short of desirable.
What do you think about just playing Treasure Map in that slot?
You can play Treasure Map.
I think I'd rather have Treasure Map, which, I mean, it's not the best way of doing this, but it does smooth the color considerations that you were raising a little bit. And
yeah, that's not bad.
For a deck like this, which has so many different kinds of specific responses, it's got Eldest Reborn for big stuff. It's got Bedevil for, kind of catch-all. It's got Lightning Strike, Moment of Craving, Lava Coil, Split, like you said. You could not pay me to play Disdainful Stroke main deck. There's no way.
Really?
No way.
I could play Disdainful Stroke main deck.
Not in this deck. I'll tell you
why. Why?
Because Disdainful Stroke is at its weakest against mono red, right? This deck looks terrible against mono red to me.
But that's a great reason to play it. Give up the mono red matchup, at least game 1.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the best argument I can muster because it sure doesn't look great against mono red.
No. I don't think that but I think that mono red could be winnable. But the thing is, this deck has such good answers, right? Disdainful Stroke is for people who they need to fill their slot or they need to use their mana in a certain way because if something resolves or something big resolves, they're not guaranteed to be able to answer it very well, right? Dimir decks historically have relied on cards like Disdainful Stroke because there's certain types of permanents that they can't deal with easily, right? So But this deck doesn't really have that problem. So, unless you think that you're going to get behind an experimental frenzy or, something like that, I'm not sure why I would want a Disdainful Stroke.
I like Disdainful Stroke a lot better when I'm playing Teferi, so that when I untap my 2 land, I can cast Disdainful Stroke.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how much am I really getting for not playing with Ionize or Absorb or whatever? Like some kind of 3-mana Sinister Sabotage, something.
That's a really, really good point. I mean, those could just be either a different 2-mana response spell. Like he's got that split of Strike, Coil, and actually, I don't.
So part of it is I really like Syncopate in the format.
Yeah, I don't think I would play Lightning Strike in this deck. And the more that I think, it just doesn't make any sense. Like if you're in for Lightning Strike, just be in for Lava Coil. The instantaneous, aspect of the Lightning Strike is not that meaningful when you're just removing creatures.
Particularly when you have Bedevil and the Eldest Reborn for additional Planeswalker interaction.
Yeah, it's like the instant speed removal becomes so much more relevant when you have lots of creatures yourself, because your opponent might have to commit into a situation where you can control blocks, or you're attacking and then you want to kill something on a gang block or something, and that's when Lightning Strike will shine over Lava Coil. But if you're a control deck and you're gonna win with like some big spectacular Niv Mizzet or Crackling Drake or Eldest Reborn kind of route to victory, just Lava Coil their creature. It kills drakes and Lightning Strike doesn't, and it kills things to death, which sometimes you got to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I like Lava Coil a lot in this deck.
So I think those would be some changes. So you didn't like the Insights. I don't like the Disdainful Strokes or the Lightning Strikes. But I think but there's other stuff that's cool, and I have to respect your opinion on Bedevil plus Niv Mizzet. That is a problem that needs to be solved if we're going to consider Grixis.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know. I don't have the answer yet, but I think your treasure map idea is a reasonable place to start.
All right. A ton of cool new stuff this week. Can't wait for next week.
Awesome, dude. I'll see you then.
All right. Bye-bye, Patrick.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, so jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a